benefit from our country's patrimony and economic fortune. Today, we wish to announce that we in the PNCRA PNU, as the next government, will conceptualize, manage, and pay out large lump sum cash transfer as a good governance dividend. What do we mean by this? When in government, the money saved from reducing corruption, financial incompetence, negligence, and pure recklessness inherited from the PPP will be distributed every year to Guyanese citizens. A good governance dividend will also include income from our prudent financial investment and economic development strategy. We anticipate that $100,000 at minimum could be distributed each year to most or all citizens. Let us be clear, this is not a one-off measure. This is a recurring yearly payout to citizens. This is not a knee-jerk or sporadic measure. This is a calculated financial exercise to ensure Guyanese can benefit as much as possible from our oil revenues. Our governance dividend will be funded from several sources, including one, a reduction in the billion of dollars in corrupt and inflated contract awards. Two, tighter management of public finances following the advice from the IMF and other financial institutions. Together with one above, we expect that we can save on average 20 to 40% of public expenditure annually. That will result in tens of billions of dollars in good governance dividend. Three, robust audit of the expenditure of oil companies with sustained efforts to recover outstanding unauthorized expenditures and to prevent any such future expenditures. Four, removing flaws and weaknesses in the 2016 PSA to prevent financial leakages and loopholes. Five, prudent investment of the NRF funds, especially considering high profit oil from 2026. Excuse me. Six, efficient payment of cash transfer to reduce corruption, fraud, and unfair omission of persons. And seven, the windfall that is obtained when oil prices rise above a determined amount will be distributed to the people of Guyana. These measures could generate over $60 billion in cash every year in good governance dividend. The PNCRA, PNU as the next government will ensure that this money gets in the hands of the people on a monthly, annual, and predictable basis in a way that citizens could use the resources to obtain loans, mortgages, and other forms of investments. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now open the floor for questions, and customary by the raise of hands, so state your name and media house.
While our journalists are putting together their questions there, we just wanted to add some further clarity given some of the really ridiculous things you're starting to hear that you're hearing again from Vice President Jagdeo. And we just want to zero in on one of the quotes that he's put out that lately that really has, I think, typified the way that the PUP is not thinking clearly, planning at all, and is really only now coming to understand what we've been talking about for years. He is on record as saying recently, we are thinking about this. This is with regard to cash transfers. It is a sustainable thing for us. We can do this periodically, give our people some money, and still do the infrastructure, balancing the interests. We don't have to do one at the expense of the other. Our people can benefit. That is what we're about, balance in a sustainable way. Now, I of course, have not given to calling people names, but I was tempted to call him Christopher Columbus because he is now aware that you need to balance infrastructure development with cash grants, whereas we have been saying that literally for years. This is just a great example of how the PUP is scrambling for ideas. There's no real sense of how the economy is working, and it's just putting out what comes off the top of their head or copying what it is that we say. It is also important to note that one of the reasons that he is only now coming to this conclusion that there needs to be a balance with infrastructure is because he does not know and has not been keeping track of the unemployment rate and the way that wages have grown or fallen in this country. And so does not have a clear idea of the trends that have been taking place in the Guyanese economy. So he is only now aware that there needs to be a balance and that cash transfers are necessary to ensure that Guyanese are benefiting as the economy grows. This is a classic example of someone who is guessing rather than looking at economic data. And we reiterate our call for the regular publishing of basic economic data like the unemployment rate and the wage growth rate in the country. Additionally, we note that the PPP is now talking about a $60 billion transfer, but we have been saying since the national budget was published that the $7 billion that they spoke about as being for cost of living relief and so on was not enough money, that there needed to be a much more substantial intervention. So it is now that PPP is even aware that $7 billion was not enough. It is again a manifestation of the fact that they did not know what it was that they were doing. We even have seen the PPP say that inflation is an issue, and so they can't give teachers and public servants salary increases. But now apparently inflation is not an issue, and they can provide large cash handouts. This to me, cash grants. This to me is really alarming, and it is callous that the PPP has decided to lie to the Guyanese people that they care about inflation and to lie to teachers when really they never really cared in the first place.
Okay. I have a few questions from Antonia Day from Channel 67, HBTV News. The first question is, what are your thoughts on 100,000 cash distribution per individual, and if this would be able to aid due to the high living costs locally?
We've said from the inception that it cannot deal with the high cost of living, but we welcome money to the people of Ghana. Now, first of all, the government was talking about households. And then right in front of the Arthur Chung Center, I said that they didn't define household. And then we called on what happened during COVID, and there were serious problems with what constitutes a household. The opposition expressed the view, and former Minister Jordan said that too, that we should use individuals 18 years and above. Two reasons. One, you remove from the PPP this whims and fancy of just deciding what is a household by their activists on the ground. And secondly, with us giving it to individuals, with the government giving it to individuals, what it does is ensure more money goes to the people. And let me give you an example. In a case where you have a mother, a father in the house, and two children over the age of 18, right away you're talking about 400,000. Of course, there will also be the downside, which is not large in numbers, in which there is only one person of that age, and it means they will only get 100,000. But overall, people will get more. Households in Ghana are on average 3.6 to 4, which means based on the formulation we have pushed to the government, and the government has now conceded to, more money will go to the people of Guyana.
Thank you. Question 2. The Bank of Guyana has reported that food prices have increased by 3.2% during the first half of the year. What are your thoughts about this from an economic standpoint?
Well, I don't know where Bank of Guyana got their figures from. But what I do know is that the persons who go in the market are aware that it would have raised far more than 3.2%. We are seeing much higher increases. Anybody who went recently to purchase, say, celery, would recognize what was like 6 months ago, $1,500 to $2,000 is now $4,000. That speaks to at least like 100% increase in some of those products. So I don't know where the Bank of Ghana get the statistics from, but it surely doesn't correspond with the reality on the ground. And we are more concerned with the reality because a lot of people are complaining about the high increases for the basic things in this society. Even pint of room, which people could pick up at a cheap cost, is now $800 to $1,000. So a pint of room, which is like a poor man means of keeping the place clean, has more than doubled. So again, I don't know where they got the figures from. I can only face the reality.
I would also like to add that this is a pretty classic example of when you copy what somebody else said without really understanding the concept and the policies behind it. We have also said that in addition to these cash grants, we need to have a policy of building out local agriculture, expanding production across the regions, providing grants to farmers so that they can produce more and lower their costs of production, providing vouchers to canter operators and other folks, minibus drivers and so on, who are engaged in transportation. That has been one of the core areas of the increased costs of living. The reason that we've talked about a raft of measures is because we believe that you have to look comprehensively at the issue of the cost of living in Guyana and of inflation. And you have to have various measures that target it directly and that will be effective. The PUP, because they have no proper plan, is just copying whatever it is that we say that sounds popular without looking at the other areas that need urgent intervention. And so we believe that while the cash transfer and so on is good, it will not bring down the cost of living in the way that it needs to be brought down because a comprehensive suite of measures is what is required.
And in addition, we should point out it is shameful and the government is shameless to offer only 100,000. We have shown consistently that people can get more money in a more structured and predictable way. This here is just their response to our cause and the fact that they lack a plan.
Thank you. Do you think the government has done enough to address the woes of citizens regarding inflation?
No, the government has not until now produced a raft of measures. I think we had given them some 7 to 12 points that they can utilize to help bring down the cost of living. Of course, a lot of it starts with a livable wage, which we have been calling for. We have pointed out to them, it's not like if it is a big set of imported inflation. Celery ain't got no imported inflation. Pint of broom ain't got no imported inflation. Pak chai ain't got no imported inflation. Planting, you name it. We have said to them that the government needs a structured approach to agriculture in which we expand agriculture to all regions to make them sustainable. And once those regions are producing the food they need, the prices will come down because one, you're increasing output to absorb the money that goes into the economy. And therefore, because you have increased the amount of goods there, food stuff there, it will impact prices downwards and in a positive way. So that was one measure. We also pointed out that you can give assistance, but you got to be able to do it in a structured way. In the area of fuel for people transporting goods to the market. But of course, if you bring that under the PPP, it will become a mechanism for corruption. That's the only thing they know. But there's need for a raft of measures. If you put money into the economy and you don't do the things to increase production and productivity, you might be fueling the inflation that Jack Dale was talking about. But when we talked about it, we talk about putting the resources and at the same time taking the anti-inflationary measures to ensure that your prices are good in the market.
We will now take Mr. Benchmark.
I'm not hearing you. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, good morning, sir. With regards to the agenda of the PPP, who started what and who was the first, which is an infantile approach, because we already know that they were against cash grants, they were against these sort of things, having said that, though, what sort of plans you guys in the opposition have with regards to keeping an eye to ensure that there's minimum amount of corruption on the part of the PPP as they go about to distribute the $100,000 per household? There is already perception out there that this is a huge Ponzi scheme. And you mentioned earlier, sir, about the COVID cash grant. As of now, over 40,000 persons have not received. All they've gotten was their pink slips. They have not received their 25,000. And if the government can be so dishonest and, if I may say, corrupt as it pertains to $25,000, how concerned are you that they are going to be even more corrupt with $100,000? My second question is, again, on the opposition's approach with regards to the numbers and with regards to ensuring that this continued exposure of the government's elections bribery scheme be exposed. Is there a shadow minister of finance being part of this? And if so, who is that person? Just out of curiosity. Thank you.
Now, let me begin by saying, even at the day when Irfan Ali announced what he announced, we made a few points that point in the direction of seeking to reduce corruption. One of the first things we said at the time is that the money should not be distributed by PPP activists like happened with the
COVID-19.
The second thing, nobody should be moving around with large amounts of cash. There's a system the government has, and they can cut checks, and people get a check and take it to the bank. We also believe that there should be early audit of the distribution so that there is a pressure for accountability. But knowing the People's Progressive Party, they are likely to find some way to become involved in corruption. I believe it is interwoven into the fabric of their existence. And so while we outline those measures, we still have got to keep our eyes on them. I've said before, there's a big battle going on in the PPP about whether Ali people are more corrupt than Jack Dew's people. Well, that corruption battle will affect us, and so we'll have to monitor it. As it relates to the Shadow Minister Finance, as far as I'm aware, it is Director Finance, and where possible, she has been doing the work that she's expected to do.
We're now going to take Mr. Adam Harris. Mr. Harris.
I have a question. If you speak to her, please. Sir, the government proposes to use some database to identify every person 18 and over. Obviously, that should be your voting population, sir. Are you in a position to state a rough figure of what this number could be? And sir, if that number is determined, are you in a position to undertake even more work for a proper voters list, sir?
We are continuing the work for a proper voters list. I am aware that shortly there will be some intense discussions on the question of biometrics and a clean voters list. Our commissioners are briefed and will take their position on that. I do not believe the voters list could be used as a basis for anything. In the first place, you will have to place some conditionality for persons getting the grant. Somebody can't just fly in from overseas and pick up a grant and go. And there are a lot of people on the voters list who have been residing overseas. There are a lot of people who are dead. And so to even suggest using the voters list, which is what should be used, I think they should take the opportunity to clean the list so that when we are paying it out, it is done in a proper way. But again, knowing the PPP, they would prefer it like that because it offers opportunity for corruption. I mean, I was laughing when I heard Barry Jack, they were talking about Brutus facing the law because the PPP doesn't hide um, people who break the law. I wonder if you remember Darren Lal. I wonder if he remembered himself, who there were clear allegations made against him about bribery and corruption, and then for him to have the temerity and audacity to come and say something like that, he must believe that Guyanese are just short-memoried. It's just ridiculous. So I think that we will need a clean voters list, and we need to have a well-authenticated list for this distribution. And I do believe what former Minister Jordan said, we should use the 31st of October 2024, so that everybody who would have arrived at that age by the end of this year must be entitled. On what I average the voters list should be, I don't see it exceeding 600,000. It's virtually impossible. But again, the PPP does nothing that is data driven. They pull everything from the sky. Ask them for the feasibility study for Skeldon, you can't find one. Ask them for the feasibility study for the gas to shore, you can't find one. They are not a data-driven political entity. They operate based on transactions, what money they can make. And so I don't hold much hope out that even these cash transfer, limited as they are, will meet the people in the way it should and help them to attenuate the rough conditions they are facing.
Are there any more questions on the press statement?
Yes, I have one more question.
Sure, you can go ahead.
And this has to do with the ability of the opposition to monitor the distribution of cash grants. You spoke about what happened during the COVID cash grant when people were denied. Are you in a position to be, well, I don't want to say proactive, but to be active if there's a similar occurrence this time around?
The last time around, we were proactive. That was why we were able to see how many people had pink slip and couldn't receive anything. I recall personally being involved in going into Cummins Lodge to confirm that they give the whole street, and the one African Guyanese in there, they give nothing to. But like I said, we pointed out the need for the use of the government structure and the use of checks. It is very difficult to monitor if you're giving people a bag of money and then they share the money whenever they like. There is no time, say between 8 and 4. They can go in the night to some household, allegedly, and share it. So the government creates an ad hoc approach. And that ad hoc approach, a lot of time, prevents you from monitoring it in the way that it should be monitored. So if they continue to go down that road, you will be able to monitor, but you will never get an accurate account of the level of corruption and the amount of people that didn't get access to the resources that they should have gotten.
Adam, one of the things that also happened with the COVID-19 cash grant distribution is that some of that discrimination was very much community-based. So I recall going to communities that were friendly to the opposition, and they didn't get the cash grant, or only some people in the front row got, and so on. And people complained bitterly about that. So if there are pockets of that kind of large-scale discrimination as there was last time, that is something, of course, that we would highlight in order to ensure the Guyanese benefit from what they are rightfully entitled to. As leader mentioned, this ad hoc approach really is not the appropriate way to be dealing with cash transfers, and we believe in a much more structured approach which can eliminate or at least reduce as much as possible corruption, and of course allow us to produce much larger regular cash transfers, as we've said, between $1 and $2 million. That is easily attainable under a more structured system rather than this chaos.
We also have to remember that the PPP likes chaotic situation because that offers them the opportunity to become involved in illegalities.
Are there any questions outside of the press statement?
Sorry, Honorable Leader, perhaps this is a good time to ask you about your assessment of the registration process, because that will help you to understand the amount of money being disbursed as cash grant. For example, the Vice President Jagdeo said, no foreigner. I don't know his definition of foreigner, but we also know that you had the two shows who were permitted to register Venezuelans, albeit that they claim that their parents were Venezuelans.
Guyanese.
So our Guyanese, sorry. How good is your monitoring mechanism in this regard, sir?
It is difficult to monitor. Let me tell you why. Now, under the law, somebody could register to vote as a Commonwealth citizen. And so you will have that group. But they are not entitled to cash grants, as far as I'm aware. And here is where you get loose concepts from the likes of Barry Jagdeo. If you was claiming that you're going to use the register that exists or the data that exists, you have to decide who constitutes a Guyanese citizen. And then you also have to decide, is it a Guyanese citizen resident? Because there are many Guyanese overseas. And if you say Guyanese citizen, somebody could live in for 45 years in the United States, never came home, and come home and collect. They just don't think through things. They just lack a plan. Now, one has to sit and work out thoroughly. For instance, I think it was former Minister Jordan who said that one of the considerations should be persons who are in Guyana at least 183 days a year, Guyanese. Now, that is a reasonable barometer in the sense that the person spent at least half of the year here. Now, I don't think this government does that kind of analysis. And so until now, it is still loose. When he said no foreigner will be allowed, in the present environment, he is just talking because you haven't defined what you mean by a foreigner. What happens if a man is registered, he's a foreigner, but he isn't a citizen? Is he entitled or not? And there are many of those around here. So the government needs to learn to do things like concept papers. When I was in government service, every idea you came up with came with a concept paper. So you knew the objectives, you know the strengths, you know the weaknesses. You then can work out a clear concept of what you're talking about. And then you could put in place the modalities for implementation. There is nothing like that in this structure they call in government. This is men wake up a morning and believe if we shy two brick to the sky, rain and fall, and they shy two brick. Has no scientific basis. There is no structured approach. I was appalled when we returned to government in 2015, and I went into what was then the Ministry of Youth, Sport, and Culture, and to see the destruction in the filing system, so that you don't have proper filing, so that you can go back and reference, etc. So this government has destroyed Guyana, and they continue to operate as if they're running a cake shop that is their own and nobody else has an interest. And I believe that we will have to seek to monitor, but monitoring will be difficult because the government does everything to ensure you can monitor what they're doing so that they can facilitate the corruption they are involved in. That's your reality. Add to it, they have compromised the police force. And because they have compromised the police force and they have a commissioner that will operate based on their diktats, even if you monitor it as happening in the local government, we monitor what happened in local government. We brought to the attention of the government and the police commissioner that there were a number of people that were involved in forgery from the PPP. They couldn't act on it because the police is controlled, GCOM in large measures controlled by the government. And so we can monitor, we'll have the data, we'll expose them. Where the question comes is the question of enforcement. It's a lawless society, and I see no reason why the PPP would want it to become a lawful society.
Is there any other questions? At this time, I'd like to thank our media personnel for joining today's conference, our viewing audience on all our social media platforms. Thank you, and I hope you all enjoy your weekend.
Recording stopped.